Okay, I'd like to talk about the Andrew Johansson, who was my mother's father, who was born in Kvarnberaten in Östra Högvalt in Sweden, Sverige. And he was one of 11 children in the family. Uh, 8 came over, 1 went back to Sweden. Nels was the oldest. He came over and he was born in 1872. Anna was in 1874, Sophia 1878, Emma 1876, Colin 1882, Andrew 1884, Matilda was 1886, Johan John was 1888, Carl was 1891, Hannah was 1896, and Elin 1893. Hannah and Elin stayed in Sweden, and Johan or John went back after being here 11 years. Uh, we have pictures of just a few of the barns and houses that Andrew built throughout the area, and hopefully it was amazing how they could do it with just horses and manpower to build these big barns. So we'd like to just have people know about it in Sweden. Okay, like we said, I said before, John went back. He was a very good builder. He helped my grandfather with a lot of the barns, but what happened was he went back to Sweden, and he had a sweetheart in Sweden. He was going to bring her back, but she refused to go to America, so he went back to Sweden and stayed there. So they had one son named Gunnar, and they lived in Österhögvälta next to Kvarnberaten. And this is their mother. She was widowed that her husband died when he was 45 years old. And she lived at Kvarnberaten. And 8 of her 11 kids went to America, but well, it was 7 actually because Johan came back. So she lived to be 80 years old. Okay, Johannes Magnus' daughter, she was married to Johannes Nilsson. She had a brother, his name was Anders Magnusson, and he came over first, and he built a house in Ensign and a Varney farm, but then he bought a grocery store, and well, it was a hardware store out on the main highway, so he moved and we'll show you the house that he had later on. I'll tell you about it. This is the Rapid River Masonville Township Cemetery where many Swedish immigrants are buried. And this for the flag is the Swedish flag and American flag was put there by the son of Johan Greenland. He was John Greenland. He was from Skellefteå area, so his son wanted to put the Swedish flag up. He was a real proud Swede. And this is a tombstone of Hjalmar Nelson, who was my father. He was born in Arvika and came here in 1924. He married my mother, who was his daughter of Andrew Johansson, and they had. I have five siblings, and they all live in the area. This is the gravestone of Big Andrew, Stor Anders, Father Andrew Johansson. He is buried at the Rapid River, or the Masonville Township Cemetery. And that's his wife, Alma, she died quite young of cancer, but she was from Manskog, and she was born in, she'd moved there from Torsby up in northern Värmland, up north of Sunne. And this is my mother, Edna, who was born in America. She was very fluent in Swedish, and she had been to Sweden a couple of times, but she spoke the kind of what they call the gamla bundsvensk. So, and that's me, Andrew. I was named after my grandfather, Anders, and my mother, Edna. And this is a picture of us, my grandfather, or my father built this big concrete watering. It was a spring that fed this, and my grandfather built that boat out of what they call Western white cedar. He was handy at building stuff. At that time, he was close to 70 years old, but in the boat is myself and my sister Constance and my brother Mark. Yeah, it explains it. And this is when he was a young man when he came over there, Big Andrew. There's when he's older. And that's I took that picture when I was in Sweden of John. He was in his 80s then. He was still busy building things. And that's John when he was over here. That's how he built a lot of houses. And as you can see, it was all forest around there. So that's what they did. Okay, my grandmother Alma was what they call a catalog bride. My Andrew was looking for a wife because there wasn't that many women over there. So he sent a letter to his mother to find a wife for him. And then my grandmother came over. And there he was in he went out west for a while. He went to Homestead in British Columbia, but then he found out there was a farm for sale in the area in Ensign, so he came back, and it was cowboy. He did bridge building and stuff like that out there. So, and he came back then to Ensign and bought that farm. It was a beautiful, beautiful soil. And there they were in a logging camp. They used to. There was a great demand for railroad ties because they were building a lot of railroads that time. So there they were. They were uh, having a good time at the lumber camp. There's Andrew again. There's Andrew is hiding in the flowers with one of the kids in front of his barn. That's been taken back in the late 20s. And there's a bunch of kids. There was a lot of in the area. There was a lot of young kids. There was some of the Anderson family not next. They lived next by, close by, so they came. They used to be playing together all the time. So you notice that how they had to build barns to put the hay in. There's another view of the lumber camp again. So this was a French hired hand. He was a Frenchman, a French background, French Canadian. So he stayed with my grandfather and was a kind of hired hand. There's a homestead with one of the bulls they had and a team of horses. There's my grandfather with a Holstein cow. They had a cooperative. Was built. It was made up of different nationalities, but they all got together and they sold milk and they sold butter and everything. So they, they they made a living anyway. Okay, there's her name was she was her name was Anna Tallinn from Gunnerskog. She married my great uncle Nils Johnson. He was the first one to come over. And Margaret, who was born in Sweden, she came over after he came over here and made a little money. You notice the stumps right close by the house, and that house was built by my uncle John and my grandfather Andrew. You can see how the corners are on the logs there. That they had to hew the logs and make those unique style of corners. Yeah, that's my sister Constance Elma. She was in the back of a '48 Chevrolet pickup truck. And there's my mother as a young girl, and my grandfather Andrew, and one of the I think it was Axel. Andrew and Axel. Gunner was there someplace. That's my grandmother Alma with one of the horses and the cattle. You see the forest right behind the barn. They had a lot of had to clear all that land to farm it. Yeah, I'll explain it. Okay, And this is the original Anders Magnusson. He was the great, he was my grandfather's uncle, and he came here first, and he built this. My grandfather then came after and built a house for him. But like I say, he later went out and bought a store that sold groceries and hardware out by the main highway they came through. There's a view of the house that they built in the back. There's a barn. That's the first style. He built a lot of these, what they call gambrel roofs. He had a straight roof before, but now he built after that. He learned the technique of making gambrels. That's the outside of the barn, and then the door that they built. That's me. They're showing the scissor truss and pole rafter inside the barns, and those big some of the big beams were hewed by there was my grandfather, when he built, he hired a bunch of people, and a lot of them were a Croatian background, Croatian immigrants, and they helped build them. It took a lot of manpower to build these barns like that. So, see all the pole rafters are made out of spruce and balsam, and some of the beams were hewn. It was quite a skill. That's an old door, and that they used concrete. They put big stones in the concrete. A lot of big stones around, so that's how they build their foundations. It's inside. You can see there's a sign there. It's owned by a Croatian. It says parking for Croatians only. That's the inside. Those beams are all hewed by a Croatian, and they come up. That's inside the barn. And dog tracks in the cement. There's the beams that were hewed for the flooring. That's the outside. That's the barn. So that's the gambrel style, they call it. Hip roof too, they call them that way. Now we're going to the homestead. That's the house my Uncle John and my grandfather built. There's a picture when my grandmother and grandfather, they had a little shack when they first started. They had to clear out the land and start farming, but they built this house. That's their grandfather's first barn. He built it out of this plain old wood he got around the area. Okay, this is my cousin Colleen. They own the farm yet, so they're still farming it. They're raising beef cattle on it now. That's the plain old scissor truss side. They call it scissor truss. You can see the truss going up towards the middle of the rafters, and they had to go. They're long rafters, so they had to go with that, make a peak out of it. That's me. This is a barn that we're going to see now. It's built with squared off. They're milled timbers, they call them. When they went on the sawmills, they make them squared, easier to work with. That's one of the sheds outside the barn. That's the barn, gambrel style roof. Yeah, now I see used solid squared rafters. That was easier to build with. That was easier to put together instead of big poles. Now they use squared timber. This was built in about 1949. There's the hay they put in there. Still using it. See, that's how it looks, like almost like a church. There is all they use all milled wood. Then it was easy to work with. There I'm standing here. And that's the old door they built. That's the hay loft. That's a cousin that was. He's a great grandson of the ones that originally had it. His name was Gustav Tiberg. He was from Sunna, and he married my great aunt Sophia Tiberg Johansson. That's the original barn, but it is added onto it. That's what they call a bug. That they used to do farm work with those vehicles back before they had tractors. That's a dovetail cut that's a dovetail. That's all. Uncle John, that's how he made the joints for the corners. And the peg, they had to peg them too. So you drill a hole and they pegged them. All done by hand. There's the old barn, the original barn, added on to inside. That's inside the barn again. Now broad axe, you can see the broad axe and hand-hewed marks. There's a horseshoe. Another view of how they built it. There it is again. Lots of work. This is a homemade table saw built by Oscar Teberg. He was the son of Sophia Teberg, Sophia Johnson Teberg. They did everything, they built everything themselves. This is their barn built for a Croatian immigrant. His name was Tony Mohar, and he was from a place called Bug in Croatia, in Yugoslavia. So they he built. My grandfather built for the Croatians as well as Swedes, and they built barns the next peninsula over called the Garden Peninsula. For these people were a lot of French Canadian immigrants. They built for them too. This John Lundberg, he was from Skellefteå. And my grandpa had a unique style. He had what they call a dormer sticking out of the roof all the time.